Hey, how's it going, everyone? Just back with a part two on this Vince Vitale. We'll just continue on with what he says.
But it's the shortest verse in the Bible, and it's very important to me as a Christian that first and foremost, God weeps at the suffering of this world, and that has to be our first response as well. I'll say a couple of...
So just to quickly summarize my part one, Jesus and the narrative in the Bible is that all evil, at least what we perceive as evil, death in the case of Lazarus or other things, is for God's glory to be revealed. And only a few people will get it. And so he's weeping not at the death because he knows that he can bring Lazarus back. That's not what he's weeping about. He's weeping primarily because of the lack of faith. But he's going to use this interaction to build people's faith. That's what's happening. When we look at the world right now, we weep because we see a lot of pain, of course, literal, and emotional pain and all that, financial struggles. But it's our cry to God through the Bible is lack of faith. And that's why the world is the way it is, because God is not present, in any transaction anywhere, including this video by a co-ministry, an international ministry, our leaders, even in flat earth, ball earth, of course, everywhere. That's what is missing in the world. And so we as people who have it and want more, that's what we should ask for, is to see all this evil and to ask God for more and more faith, more and more evidence of his glory, and his power.
Of other things, but please hear me at the outset to say this is not in any way meant to be an exhaustive answer to this question.
Of course not, because the answer is already in the Bible. These people don't read the Bible. Instead, they'll sit, there's a round table, there's two other people. I believe his wife is in the middle. They don't want to just read from the Bible and just make it plain and simple. It's just, they sit down, 10-minute dialogue, poetry, tug on your heartstrings, when you could just read in the Bible and says that God is the author of good and evil. And I could get the verse from explicitly in Amos 3:6, which is a good one. And again, you don't need the Bible to reaffirm to you what common sense is. It's Amos 3:6 is a good one. Shall a trumpet be blown in the city and the people not be afraid? Shall there be evil in the city and the Lord hath not done it? ? It's rhetorical. It should be obvious.
I do think it's interesting when we talk about something like the coronavirus. In philosophy, it would be referred to as natural evil. And that in itself is an interesting terminology. You might think it's an oxymoron. You might think if it's genuinely natural, if it's just the way it's supposed to be, if it's just the way that physics is...
It is an oxymoron, because nothing is naturally evil. What's good and evil? Good and evil is what the God of the Bible likes and doesn't like. And so it's a spiritual thing. It has to be. So there is no thing as natural evil. That means that man is coming up with what is good and evil, and that is Antichrist. That's against the Bible. And so why is he quoting philosophers? He's quote armchair philosophers, which he's one, and not just reading out of the Bible, and just using common sense. But he's going down a path, and he's leading people down this path that is away from the Bible. And he's using mainstream, quote, armchair philosophers to do that.
Supposed to operate. Well, then, is it actually evil? Can you get a moral category like evil out of something which is just physical and natural? And if it's evil, then is it really natural? If it's genuinely evil, wouldn't that make it unnatural?
This word salad is, again, completely consistent with what we see in the media, this coronavirus, news updates every single day. Our flat earth leaders who are a bunch of morons. It's just talking in circles, It's like, go to the atheists, get their advice, and then present us with truth. It's the same thing that this guy's doing. He's a religious person, has the Bible right in front of him, and supposed to be teaching it. But he goes and reaches his arm out into philosophers and using their language to go to the Bible and then dilute it or just move it, kick it off the table. There's no reason to go into that terminology at all. And he's going to make an absurd analogy with the weather in a second, but I want people to be aware, if it's not already, what the agenda really is.
And not natural. So it's an interesting terminology. I find myself wondering if actually that classification, if it points towards God rather than away from God, if it points towards a moral lawgiver who can be the ground of a moral standard of moral reality that can get us a category like moral evil, and also towards
it points away from the God of the Bible, which again is this person's job, this whole ministry's job, and they're doing a wonderful job doing that. A+ for effort to talk in circles and pad the Bible or just kick it off the table.
Narrative that makes some sense of the fact that this seems very unnatural. This does not seem like it's the way things are supposed to be. Another perspective that I want to open up here is that, natural evils, they're not intrinsically evil.
What was that perspective? It's just like literally these people are all the same. These people are essentially on the same team as Rumpus and all them. They're all ball earthers, but he just says a bunch of stuff for a few minutes. Then, let me open up another thing. Like, what point did he just make? So these people are lost.
If you have a tornado and you are watching it from a safe distance, it can be majestic to behold. It could be beautiful to behold. If you put a virus under a microscope, it could be beautiful to behold. And there's even a category of viruses, friendly viruses. We need them in our body. The vast majority of viruses are not.
Jeez, so now they're shilling for viruses. Like, come on, you could not make this existence up. This has to be the end times because the Bible is just being destroyed, and these are people who actually have a large following. Jesus, Ravi Zacharias has 428,000 subscribers, and he's written many, many books. And Jesus is just being absolutely pummeled from every single direction inside the church, and has been kicked out of Flat Earth, a long time ago. He was never really invited, ever. But this is getting ridiculous, for sure. I mean, he's talking about the beauty of quote evils that God brings for judgment, which is what it all is, and ultimately for his name to be glorified. It's like the only thing that we can sort of understand is evils is that when they get to a point where they're more than we can handle ourselves, then it forces us to look outside of ourselves. And now we're looking to the government and we realize they're actually attacking us. And so we have no other choice. And this is why God wants this. He creates environments where people, his faithful, whoever those people are, and hopefully we're in that group, we have to choose him, And so this is the narrative that no one understands exactly why he's doing this, but that is just obvious from what's going on, in the world. And it's clear from the Bible that that's the case. And so everything is about God being glorified, even if it's quote positive or negative.
Having a bad result, they're having a good result. And in fact, if we didn't have viruses in the world, bacteria would replicate so quickly that it would cover the entire earth and nothing could inhabit the earth, including us. It raises the question, is the problem the fundamental natural features of our universe, or is the problem the way that
he's about to do his best vegan warrior impersonation? Listen to this.
We are functioning in our environment.
So we're dysfunctional, but the environment is functional. That's what he's pushing. These people are completely satanic. Tornadoes, hurricanes, ripping off the roof of houses, viruses, AIDS, all these things, that's functional and necessary, but we're the dysfunction. So you can see what's going on here with these Satanists who are masquerading around as religious people. They don't know anything. They definitely don't know the Bible. And I want people to understand the most evil people on earth are the evangelical Christians. They are, absolutely, without a doubt, because they're the ones who should be pushing the Bible and its literalness. But in fact, they're just doing a bait and switch. They're baiting people in with a promise of salvation, which is actually an event on earth, for a select group of people. But then flipping it and then giving them government propaganda, And so this is what's going on here with, quote, Dr. Vince Vitale.
Could it be the case that we're not functioning, our bodies, the way we're supposed to in the environment that we're in? When a feral child is taken out of all community, out of all relationship that child was intended for, the child does not function properly in its environment. Could it be the case that we, as humanity, as a whole, are living separated from, outside the context of the relationship that we were most destined for, and we're not operating properly in our environment?
We are not operating properly because people like this and other government shills are putting a barrier between us and the Most High, which is common sense. We have to understand the word is logos, is logic. And so we are being withheld from common sense, and logic, that God exists fundamentally. And, our environment is a function of his lack of presence, and lack of faith. And so that's what is going on. But people like this are putting a barrier. They don't, maybe, they're not going to obviously tell us this, but that's what they're doing, And so these people's days are numbered, because this just doesn't make any sense. What he's talking about, saying that the problem is within us and we're lacking a relationship. He'll never call out bankers, government shills, government agents. He's a ball earther, so he's not going to call out NASA and their fakery. But these people are essentially atheists. They're functional atheists because they hate the God of the Bible.
There's so much more to say about this topic. I'll open up one more angle just for your consideration.
How many angles? Give us one angle first before you open up another one. He's given us nothing to think about. The first point was Jesus wept. Okay, so we're supposed to weep and cry at just all the insane amount of leverage, and evil that's on earth. That's the first angle. Then the second angle is we're not functioning. That's why the world is the way it is. Really, this is the insight that we're getting from our leadership, from our Christian leadership. This, again, I hope is very, very obvious to people that the world from the top down, everybody's objective, I'm talking about the Hebrew Israelites, Ken Hovind, Pastor Anderson, Ravi Zacharias, all the flat earth people, definitely the ball earth people, their job is to remove God, is to remove our ability to cry out to the Most High directly through His Son, Jesus Christ. And they're doing a great job. They don't want that, because once a person does that, we will look around and start asking ourselves, God, you are nowhere to be found. We know that you exist, but where are you in all of this? And then a common sense response to that is, there's so much evil that is against God. We want to be with God. And so that's what should be taught, and that's what's obvious. And it's going to become more and more obvious. Again, Jesus will use death or mass death to glorify himself. And I believe we're living in those days. And so the faithless will see death as a bad thing. They'll look at it and be like, oh man, it's so much death, it's so much evil. No, death is being released out of our body back to the presence of God. And so away from these people. And so they will never talk about that, and so these people are faithless. They're essentially atheists and they're agents.
Oftentimes when we think of suffering, we think about it like this. We picture ourselves in this world with all of its suffering. We then picture ourselves in a very different world with no suffering or far less suffering. And then we wonder to ourselves, well, surely God should have made me in the other world. Reasonable thought, but potentially problematic, because we never ask the question, would it still be you and me and the people that we love in that very different world that we think we wish God had made? In a moment of frustration with my father, this would never actually happen, Dad, but in a moment of frustration with my father, I might wish that my mom had married someone else. Might have been taller like Abdu, might have been...
There's always humor. There always has to be a witty, I call these people witty zombies, and they want all of us to be that way, like the mainstream news. They want clever people who just say things to get a laugh and then to, again, dilute God, and so we see that here. He's cracking jokes talking about, viruses, tornadoes, hurricanes, and he's just laughing, wish I had a different dad, it's kind of funny, wish I was taller and all this kind of stuff. These people are Satanists, and we look forward to the day where we're not run by these people. That's really what my cry is through my channel, is that we're tired, the group of people that, enjoy hearing the things that I share. We're tired of being run by stupid people, and people who do not in any way reflect the character of the God of the Bible.
Better looking, like Abdu. I would have been better off. I could be thinking this way, but then I should...
Calls another guy better looking. And his wife is right in between them too. This is what's going on. I'll put the link to this video down below in case somebody wants to vomit to it like I am.
Stop and realize that's not the right way to think. If my mom had wound up with someone other than my dad, it wouldn't have been me who came to exist. It would have been a totally different child who who came to exist. Well, now imagine changing not just that little piece of history, but imagine changing the way the entire natural...
They're taking out the narrative that God is behind this, like, oh, if we just change one thing, then all these, oh my God, I wouldn't be here. Where would I be? I'd be just floating in space. I wouldn't exist. These people, their job, and again, they're doing a good job for those people who are completely lost, that they take God out of it, that they take away a creator, and somebody who's pre-planned all of this, the good and the evil. And so this is a fear campaign that he's just saying, like, essentially all of this stuff, even very much in the flat earth. Like, I was on a hangout listening to Phuket Word. He's like, don't panic, everything's fine, just only thing to fear is fear itself and all that. So I'm going to roast these shills on Friday. But that's what this guy's doing too. He's like, everything's fine, the only problem is within you and all that kind of stuff. Oh, you have to be here, or else if you weren't here, the whole, earth would tip over and then all the water would fall over and all that kind of stuff. This is nonsense. This is gas, government propaganda to keep people dumbed down and stupid towards what the Bible actually says, that we're living in hell. That this flat earth system, enclosed system, is hell, and it's a training ground ultimately for God's children, conditioning for ultimately his name to be glorified. And his name can only be glorified when things align with him, and so that's what we're to do, for people who have common sense, and very, very few people do. And they're never going to say that, so their job is to make this place seem okay, and just whatever, carry on, just figure out what you got to do. And then that leads people into more and more sin. Then they'll do things to stay here in hell longer, and sin just multiplies on itself, and increases the distance towards God for an individual, and then for us as a collective group.
The world operates. Imagine if we were never susceptible to disease, or imagine if plate tectonics didn't behave the way they did, if the laws of physics had undergone a redesign. What would be the result? And I think one of the results is that none of us ever would have lived. And
that is just non sequitur, doesn't make any sense. What does that even mean? Laws of physics, plate tectonics, what is this guy talking about? All those things obey God's laws, and they're all subject to him. Plates don't move unless God wants that. It's his stage. And so the laws of physics change. It's an oxymoron. They are the laws of physics. They don't change. They're in place to reflect God's calculations, and the way that he wants things to operate in his realm. And so, no, that would not be the case if those things changed, that people wouldn't exist. That would be a completely new realm that I'm sure God has created and is out there, that potentially obey different laws, but they all reflect his goodness, and his glory, ultimately. So this again is a fear campaign. Like, oh man, what if something changed? And oh man, what if you were not here? Then, everything would just get screwed up and stuff. No, God's children, more and more every day, I hope we are realizing that this world is run by people who are actively expending a lot of energy and have a lot of money behind them to remove God from this earth, if it wasn't obvious to people already.
As a Christian, I don't think God likes that result, because I think one of the things he values about this world, even though I think he hates the suffering within it, is that it is a world that allowed for you to come to exist, and allowed for me to come to exist, and allowed for every person we see walking down the street to come to exist. I believe that God intended you before the foundation of the world, that he knit you together in your mother's womb, that he knew you before you were born. He desired you, and this was a world that allowed for you to come to exist.
These people think that all these things are happening, God just watching it. Like, this doesn't make any sense. How religious people, these people who claim to be deep, non-armchair philosophers, think that all this stuff is just God watching it happen, like, oh, great. Oh, wow, I let that happen. Shrek was born, this and that, all that. Like, he's not involved in that kind of stuff. And he has to be the originator of all this kind of stuff. So this is just propaganda. And it's just stupid. It's just, I don't even know what to say. This is just flat out dumb that anybody could butcher the Bible this badly. And then not just that, but go so far away from common sense is astounding to me. And again, it just shows the world that we live in. This has to be the end times, because the world is littered with stupidity. It's just everywhere. And the dumbest people are the people with the Bible, and trying to teach from it. And they have no idea what's going on. they turn God into somebody who's just sitting back with like, a beer, popcorn, watching everything happen, happy about that, not happy about that. God takes pleasure in suffering. We don't understand how and why, fully, but he enjoys it, or else he wouldn't let it happen. There's something going on, and this something we don't know. We know there's a conditioning going on for those who are actually being conditioned, but for what ultimate purpose? No one could ever imagine that. Why? How could we ever even think about that or predict that? The Bible doesn't tell us that. That's the mystery, but to say that God just sits there and cries when he sees suffering, I want people to understand, like I read in John 11, God is crying when he sees lack of faith, when he sees a group of people like Ravi or RZIM not give him credit for everything. That's what we're doing, and we're not moving from this. A small group of us, we know this now. God has given us the ability to understand that he's involved in everything. He's showing us encoding of himself that's blatantly obvious on the left-hand side, and some that's a bit subtle. And he's showing us slivers of righteousness where it is, mostly amongst the poor, and those who are suffering. And that this whole narrative has to bring pleasure to God. That's why he's peculiar. He has to be a peculiar individual to put his own son on the cross. And so we don't have to pretend to understand that, and it's certainly not believing in that will give some salvation in heaven somewhere, and all that kind of stuff. Salvation is an event that's happening here on earth. So they're selling people a product that they're not going to be able to follow up with. There's nothing behind the curtain. They're sending you an Amazon box with a gift of salvation, and it's completely empty. And in fact, it's leading people to more and more sin.
And to be invited into a relationship with him. Are we going to have all the answers to this question? No, we're not. But I don't think we should expect to. I was thinking this morning about...
That's the only honest thing that he said, and they always leave this kind of for the end. After they have pretended to give all the answers, they're like, no, we don't have all the answers. So the fake humility right on cue comes in.
My 1-year-old son, Raphael, and he generally does not understand why sometimes I allow him to suffer. And I was thinking specifically of one
So he gives a bunch of points, says we don't have all the answers. Now he just continues the word salad. So here we go.
Instance where they had to do some tests on his heart, and I was there holding him down while he shrieked in horror with all these wires coming out from his chest as they did these tests. He couldn't understand. He couldn't understand that I was loving him through that moment. And all I could do as a father was I just kept saying, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. I just kept saying that repetitively. Ultimately, the reason that I trust God through something like the coronavirus is not because of philosophy, but because I believe.
It would have been perfect if he talked about vaccines. That would have been just, you could not have scripted a better sermon if he talked about his son being vaccinated and how that's painful, but it's good for you. I've seen these people talk about that in another video. So again, this agenda is very, very clear. This world, it hates the God of the Bible. And so either it hates it because he's not real, or they hate it by design, by the God of it. And so I want people to know, if it's not obvious, this world is completely unlivable. We absolutely have to be in the end times, because anybody who even cares a little bit about the Bible we're being attacked by people who claim to be Christians. And so the layers of evil against us are right in our own backyard. Your everyday average church and these international ministries, certainly the government, and all that kind of stuff. So it's got to be the end.
I believe the Christian God came and he suffered with us. I believe that in the person of Jesus, that is God's way of saying, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, and it's the work.
Christ's appearance on earth in physical form is a reflection of everything that is happening as well right now, and the narrative throughout human history. Whenever God is brought into something, whether it's just a conversation, whether it's policy making, whether it's the law, whether it's education, he gets crucified. He gets killed. The Bible says he was spiritually crucified in the last days. In the book of Revelation, it talks about that. And so that's what's happening. God is being spiritually crucified by Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, the Flat Earthers, the Hebrew Israelites, every government group, everything. So this is what Christ's death on the cross, gruesome death on the cross, represents. That whenever God comes to visit us, comes to sit at the table, wants to have a conversation, everybody just kills him. And so I just want people to know, be in the part of the group in the days that we live in now that does not want God crucified anymore. We don't want it. We've done it throughout our own life, but we're not doing that anymore. We're not co-signing these idiots. Nobody, flat earthers, cold truthers, no one cares anymore. Christ is no longer being crucified by a small group of us. And we don't care how many followers you have or who you are, whatever stupid jokes that you make or anything like that. That is what that tells us, and it's physical in Christ's time, feet on the ground, and it's happening in the end times, the Bible says, spiritually.
Words of Jesus himself, here I am, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him and he with me. That's the hope that we have, the hope of a beautiful intimacy that can be everlasting, and it's a hope I believe we need to hold on to in this time.
It's not intimacy or whatever the hell he's talking about. If Christ comes and sits down and let's just say literally Christ knocks on my door and says, Shreg, do you want to have lunch or whatever? He sits down. He's not just going to, pretend like everything's fine. He knows exactly what I've done throughout my life. So I'm not going to be able to eat, because I'm going to be extremely nervous, sweating. And I'm going to be uncomfortable, obviously, because I'm in the presence of, the creator, the co-creator, the brilliant, perfect entity. So I don't know what this person's talking about. To receive intimacy with God, that's for people that are the closest to God, the Most High, Christ, his closest group, and so on. But it's not just for everyday average person, because everyday average person, first of all, won't answer the door when Christ knocks. They definitely won't sit down, and they definitely won't shut up, when he sits down and listen to the things that he has to say about our life, about the things that are going on in this world, and much less the things that he's planning to do in the kingdom of heaven. And so it's not for very many people, because people like this, everything that Christ says, they'll just ignore it or just take it down some other road. When Christ says, I'm bringing the evil to the world, Vince Vitale would get offended by that, and all that kind of stuff. And then Christ would point to the evil that Vince is doing, and he would get offended by that. Oh, no, you can't be the Christ. Christ wouldn't do this. He loves everything I do and all that. He's blessing this ministry, yada, 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 when we know that these people are Satanists. He would tell them that I made a flat stationary earth. All these kind of things. So, again, this message of the Bible, it's becoming very, very clear to me. It's for very, 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 very few people, and that's a good thing. That's the way it has to be, because the entire world is completely retarded. And so for me, it's a very, very, very small group of people, and then a majority of those people are in a destitute condition, poor, blind, lame, and all that kind of stuff. And they're growing in number, they're exploding in numbers in the days that we live in now. So if we're not in the end times, it's pretty safe for me personally to say that the God of the Bible is not true, and because the Bible is being attacked by Bible people. And so they're going to win, and they're doing well, like I've said throughout these videos, that they're succeeding. And so, what are those people that I mentioned going to do? If it's a very, very, very small group of people, and the poor, the blind, and the lame, they're not going to set up corporations and then teach the actual Bible at some point. And then we have a lot of Christians who are waiting for some Antichrist to pop up in Israel and reinstitute the temple sacrifice, and so they have no idea what's going on. And I want people to know, people that believe that are actually Satanists, because they don't care about actually themselves and what's going on in the world. And so God doesn't care about them. I want people to know that that has to be the way it is, because these people are just outing themselves in such an obvious way that they will not speak to the evil going on in the world. They will only speak to the evil that is within us, and that can only be reconciled with a relationship with Christ that is moderated and narrated and guided by people like Ravi Zacharias, who are Satanists and ball earthers and all that kind of stuff. And so that's what's going on in the world. Again, I hope this is obvious to people. This is more just me kind of thinking out loud. But we live in the last days. I say that very, very confidently now. And these people, a majority of people on earth, I want people to know there's really two buckets. There's a group of people who want to increase the communication and channel between us and the Most High. And then there's other people who want everything else besides that, anything but that, and including Christians, And so every form of gossip, every form of storyline, except the one that creates a channel between us and our Heavenly Father, who is our Creator. And so that's certainly not the case on my channel, but I want people to know that's very obvious to me, and it's everywhere, 360 degrees. happening around us, and it could not be more obvious. Hope everyone was doing well. Bye.